My son Leo whispered 3 words that froze the blood in my veins. Dad, don't react. We were sitting on a park bench in Seattle under a sky that looked like bruised iron. I was setting up a chessboard, pretending to be just another retiree killing time while waiting for his kid. Leo was supposed to be on the slide, but he had come back and was standing unnaturally close to my knee. His small hand gripped my sleeve so hard his knuckles were white. I looked at his face. He was 8 years old, but in that moment, he looked 50. His eyes were darting toward the parking lot, where a black SUV with tinted windows was idling. I started to look up, but Leo squeezed my arm again. Just look at my ankle, Dad. Please, pretend you are tying my shoe. I lowered myself to one knee on the damp concrete. My joints popped, a sound that usually made Leo giggle, but today he was silent as a statue. I rolled up the cuff of his jeans. I expected a bruise. I expected a scrape from a playground fall. What I saw made my vision blur with a red-hot rage I had not felt since my days in the field 20 years ago. Clamped around my son's thin ankle was a thick, black box. It was not a standard GPS tracker you buy online to keep track of a wandering toddler. It was military-grade hardware. It dug into his skin, leaving a raw red ring where the plastic met the flesh. A small red LED light blinked rhythmically, like a heartbeat of a machine that had no soul. This is a containment unit, I thought, my mind automatically shifting from father mode to analyst mode. This is what they put on felons. This is what they put on animals. Leo leaned down, his voice trembling so much I could barely hear him over the wind. Grandpa said if I go more than 500 yards from his house or his school, it shocks me. He said you are too poor to keep me safe, so he has to do it. He calls it the leash. I felt a bile rise in my throat. Gerald Croft. My father-in-law, the billionaire tech mogul who believed he owned this city, the courts, and my son. He had threatened to take Leo 1,000 times since my wife died. But this was a declaration of war. I reached out to touch the device, my fingers brushing the cold plastic. Suddenly, the black box vibrated violently against Leo's bone. He flinched, biting his lip to keep from crying out. A tinny, distorted voice crackled from a speaker embedded in the device. It was Gerald. I could hear the smirk in his voice. Playtime is over, old man. You have exactly 30 minutes to return my property to the manor. If you are late, I switch from vibration to voltage. Do not test me, Henry. You know I always win. The transmission cut with a sharp static pop. I stayed on my knee for a second longer, staring at that blinking red light. My first instinct was to rip it off with my bare hands, to smash it into the pavement until it was dust. But I knew, Gerald, if I tampered with it, it would trigger a fail-safe. It would hurt Leo. I slowly stood up, my knees aching, the damp cold of the Seattle afternoon seeping into my bones. I looked at my son. He was terrified, not of the device, but of what might happen to me. I forced a smile. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I brushed a stray hair from his forehead. It is okay, Leo. We are going for a ride. We are going to see Grandpa. Before I tell you what happened when we drove through the gates of hell that afternoon, I want to know something. Have you ever had someone with money use it as a weapon against your family? Have you ever felt powerless because your bank account could not fight their lawyers? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you believe that a father's love is worth more than a billionaire's ego, hit that like button and subscribe. The world needs to know that giants can fall. I helped Leo into my rusted Ford pickup truck. The engine coughed and sputtered before roaring to life, a stark contrast to the silent electric hum of the surveillance SUV that pulled out behind us. They were escorting us, like we were criminals. The drive to Croft Manor was a blur of gray rain and silence. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, the leather cracked under my palms. I looked at Leo in the rearview mirror. He was sitting with his leg extended, trying to keep the heavy device from rubbing against his skin. Every time the truck hit a pothole, he winced. We arrived at the gates of the Croft estate just as the sun was setting behind the storm clouds. The iron gates were 12 feet tall, topped with gold spikes that looked less like decoration and more like warnings. Tonight, they were wide open. A line of Bentleys, Ferraris, and Rolls-Royces snaked up the driveway. Valets in white jackets were running back and forth with umbrellas. Of course, it was Douglas's engagement party. Gerald's oldest son, my brother-in-law. The man who had once told me at my wife's funeral that he was glad she was dead because it saved the family money on medical bills. I steered my beat-up truck into the line of luxury cars. The valet looked at my vehicle with open disgust and waved me toward the service entrance, but I ignored him. I pulled right up to the front steps, blocking a silver Porsche. I cut the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. I got out, walked around to the passenger side, and opened the door for Leo. "Henry, you are making a scene!" The voice boomed from the top of the marble stairs. Gerald Croft stood there, holding a crystal flute of champagne. He looked immaculate in a tuxedo that cost more than my house. Beside him stood Douglas, looking bored, checking his watch. The chatter of the party died down. 100 guests, the elite of Seattle society, turned to look at the intruder. They saw a 68-year-old man in a worn flannel jacket and muddy boots, standing next to a terrified boy with a bulky black box on his ankle. I did not care about the audience. I picked Leo up, even though my back protested. I walked up the stairs, stopping 3 steps below Gerald, so I had to look up at him. That was how he liked it. He liked people to look up. "Take it off, Gerald," I said, my voice low and steady. "Take it off him now." Gerald laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound. He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms like a ringmaster at a circus. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. This is Henry, my late daughter's mistake. It is sad, really. The dementia is setting in faster than we expected. He forgets things. He forgets that he signed the papers. He forgets that he is unfit." He looked down at me, his eyes dead cold. "I did not sign anything, Gerald." Douglas stepped forward, sipping his drink. "Oh, but you did, Henry. Or at least, the court thinks you did. Emergency custody order, signed by Judge Miller an hour ago, based on your erratic behavior and your inability to provide basic security for the heir of the Croft dynasty. That device is for his protection. We can't have him wandering off into your neighborhood. You know, with the drug addicts and the filth." The crowd murmured. I could hear them whispering. Poor Gerald, trying to save his grandson. That old man looks unstable. Is he dangerous? I felt Leo trembling against my chest. They were rewriting reality in real time. They were painting me as the villain, the senile old fool who was a danger to his own child. I gritted my teeth. I knew arguing with them here on their turf was useless. They had the microphone. They had the audience. "I am taking my son home," I said, turning to leave. That was when the world turned white. Leo screamed. It was a high, piercing shriek that shattered the polite atmosphere of the party. His body convulsed in my arms, his muscles seizing up. I almost dropped him, but I fell to my knees, cradling him against the cold stone of the stairs. The smell of ozone filled the air. "Oops," Gerald said. He was holding his phone, tapping the screen casually. My finger slipped. That was a level 3 shock. It goes up to 10. "You see, Henry, the device has a geofence. You are currently trying to remove the asset from the approved zone. The system interprets that as a kidnapping attempt. It defends the asset automatically. Leo was sobbing now, clutching his ankle. "Dad, it burns. Make it stop. Please make it stop." I looked up at Gerald. For a split second, the mask slipped. I let him see the eyes of the man I used to be. The man who hunted warlords in the jungles of South America. The man who could disassemble a weapon in the dark. Gerald flinched, stepping back, spilling a little of his champagne. But then he remembered who I was supposed to be now. Just a broke watchmaker. "Security!" Gerald barked. "The old man is having an episode. He is hurting the boy. Remove him." Two men in black suits materialized from the shadows. They were big, ex-military types. One of them grabbed Leo from my arms. I held on, but the other one kicked me hard in the ribs. I gasped, the air leaving my lungs. I lost my grip. They tore my screaming son away from me. "No!" Leo yelled, reaching for me. "Dad!" I tried to stand, but the second guard grabbed me by the collar of my jacket and dragged me down the stairs. My boots scraped against the marble. The guests parted like the Red Sea, looking at me with mixture of pity and revulsion. I was thrown onto the gravel driveway. My truck was already being towed away. "Get off the property, Mr. Cole," the guard spat, standing over me. "If you come back, the boss says he will set the shock level to 10 and leave it there until the boy stops moving. He says it will be a lesson in discipline." I lay there in the mud as the heavy iron gates began to close. Through the bars, I could see Douglas handing Leo a napkin to wipe his tears. Not a hug, just a napkin, looking at him like he was a broken toy that needed to be shelved. Gerald raised his glass to me one last time before turning his back. The gates slammed shut with a final metallic clang that echoed like a prison door. I stood up slowly. The rain was falling harder now, washing the mud from my face, but not the shame. I was 68 years old. I had $12 in my bank account. My back was screaming in pain, and my son was trapped in a golden cage with monsters who would torture him just to break me. I looked at the security camera mounted on the stone pillar of the gate. I knew Gerald was watching the feed from his office. I stared directly into the lens. I did not scream. I did not bang on the bars. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, silver pocket watch. It was broken. The hands frozen at 6 o'clock. I clicked the top button. The back of the watch popped open. Inside, there was no clockwork mechanism, just a tiny, glowing blue chip. "You think time has run out for me, Gerald," I whispered to the rain. "But you have no idea. You just started the countdown." I turned and began the long walk back to the city. Every step was agony, but every step was necessary. They thought they had taken everything from me. They thought I was a harmless old man who would go back to his cold apartment and die of a broken heart. They forgot one thing. A watchmaker knows exactly how to take things apart, piece by piece, gear by gear, until the whole machine stops working. The walk took hours. By the time I reached my small basement apartment in the rundown district of the city, I was soaked to the bone. My ribs throbbed where the guard had kicked me. I unlocked the door, the rusty hinges screeching in the darkness. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and loneliness. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need them. I walked past the small kitchen where Leo and I used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. I walked past his empty bedroom, where his Spider-Man pajamas were still folded on the pillow. I went straight to the closet in the back of the hallway. I pushed aside the hanging coats, the moth-eaten sweaters, and the boxes of old tax returns. At the back of the closet was a false panel. To the naked eye, it looked like just another part of the wall, painted with peeling beige paint. I placed my hand flat against the center of the panel. I pressed my thumb, index, and ring finger in a specific sequence. There was a soft hiss of hydraulics. The panel slid open. Cool blue light spilled out into the dark hallway. It wasn't a crawl space. It was a workspace, the kind that doesn't exist on any blueprint of the building. I stepped inside. The room was soundproof, lined with servers that hummed with a quiet, lethal efficiency. On the walls, there were no pictures of family vacations. There were schematics, maps, dossiers, and right in the center, a workbench covered in tools that had nothing to do with fixing watches. I sat down in the ergonomic chair, my wet clothes dripping onto the floor. I pulled a keyboard toward me. My arthritic fingers, which shook when I held a spoon earlier that morning, were suddenly steady. I typed in a command string that I hadn't used in 2 decades. The main screen flared to life. A single prompt appeared in green text against the black background. Protocol Black Eye, reactivated. I pulled up the schematics for the Croft Dynamics ankle monitor. I had built the original architecture for their security systems 20 years ago. Gerald had stolen it, patented it, and used it to become a billionaire while destroying my reputation. He thought he had erased me. He thought he had changed the codes. But a creator always leaves a back door. I zoomed in on the blueprint of the device clamped to my son's leg. My heart hammered against my ribs when I saw the power source specifications. It wasn't a standard lithium battery. It was an experimental chemical cell. Unstable. Cheap. I typed rapidly, accessing the diagnostic logs from the device through the cellular network. The data streamed across my glasses. Temperature rising. Integrity at 80%. My blood ran cold. The device wasn't just a torture tool. It was leaking. The casing was cracked, likely from when they dragged Leo. The chemical compound inside was acidic. If it touched his skin for too long, it wouldn't just burn him. It would poison his blood. I looked at the clock on the screen. The corrosion rate was accelerating. I didn't have days to file a lawsuit. I didn't have weeks to plan a heist. I had 6 hours. 6 hours before the acid ate through the casing. 6 hours before my son lost his leg, or his life. I reached for the phone. I knew what I had to do. I needed help, and I knew exactly which bridge I had to burn to get it. I dialed a number that hadn't been active in years. It rang once. Twice. Yeah? A voice answered. Rough, suspicious. Benny, I said. It's Henry. I need a suit. I need a ghost access card. And I need a hot dog. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, a low chuckle. I thought you were dead, Henry. I looked at the monitor, at the blinking red dot that represented my son trapped in the castle of a madman. I was, I said, but I'm feeling much better now. I hung up. I stood up and stripped off the wet flannel shirt. I looked at myself in the reflection of the monitor. The scars on my chest, faded and white, mapped a history of violence I had tried to forget. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was the weapon that was going to dismantle the Croft Empire. Tonight, the watchmaker was coming to stop the clock. The rain in Seattle does not wash things clean. It just makes the grime slicker. By the time I reached my apartment building, the water had soaked through my flannel shirt and settled into the marrow of my bones. My ribs throbbed where the security guard had kicked me, a dull and rhythmic ache that matched the pounding of my heart. I walked up the 3 flights of stairs to Unit 4B. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and damp carpet. This was the life everyone thought I deserved. The poor widower. The failed watchmaker, the man who had lost everything. I unlocked the door and stepped into the darkness. The silence of the apartment was heavy. Usually, this was the time of day when Leo would be asking for a snack or dragging his toy cars across the floor. Now, the silence was a physical weight. I locked the door behind me. I threw the deadbolt. Then I engaged the chain. Finally, I wedged a heavy wooden chair under the handle. It was a habit from a lifetime ago, a muscle memory that had been dormant for 8 years but had never truly faded. I did not turn on the lights. I did not need them. I knew every creak of the floorboards. I walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. In the mirror, illuminated only by the street lamp outside, I looked at the old man staring back at me. Gray hair, deep lines carved by grief, eyes that had seen too much. Gerald Croft saw a victim in this reflection. He saw a man broken by poverty and age. He was wrong. He was looking at a disguise. I dried my face with a rough towel. The trembling in my hands stopped. The hunch in my shoulders straightened. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the dusty apartment, and exhaled the persona of Henry the watchmaker. That man was gone. He had died on the steps of Croft Manor when they put a shock collar on his son. I walked into the second bedroom. It was set up as my workshop. Tiny gears, springs, and magnifying glasses were scattered across a workbench. To the landlord, this was where I fixed cheap watches to pay the rent. To anyone else, it was a hobby. I sat down at the bench. I picked up a specific screwdriver, a small torque tool with a red handle. I wasn't going to fix a watch. I reached under the heavy oak desk and found a small, almost invisible groove in the wood. I inserted the screwdriver and twisted it counterclockwise 3 times. There was a mechanical click, soft but distinct. The back panel of the closet behind me popped open an inch. It was not a magical door. It was simple engineering. A false wall I had built myself, insulated with lead to block thermal scans and lined with soundproofing foam. I pushed the rack of old coats aside and squeezed into the narrow space. The air inside was cool and smelled of ozone and heated metal. I flipped a switch. A single strip of white LED light flickered on overhead, illuminating my real life. This was not a closet. It was a command center. It was cramped, barely 6 feet wide, but it held the remnants of a career that the government had erased. Stacked on metal shelves were hard drives, signal jammers, and surveillance equipment that, while outdated by modern standards, was more reliable than anything you could buy in a store today. In the center sat a computer tower that looked like a piece of junk from the outside, but inside I knew it housed a processor capable of cracking military encryption if you gave it enough time. I sat in the chair, my wet clothes sticking to my skin. I didn't feel the cold anymore. I felt the heat of focus. I pressed the power button. The hum of the cooling fans filled the small space, a sound that felt like coming home. The screen flared to life, casting a green glow over my face. I didn't have to guess the password. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, typing a sequence of characters that was burned into my brain. Access granted. Welcome back, Ghost. The screen displayed a file directory that hadn't been modified in almost a decade. I navigated through the folders until I found it. Project Black Eye, 1998. My magnum opus. The source code I had written for a private defense contractor before Gerald Croft stole it, rebranded it, and used it to build his empire. He called it the Croft Guardian System. I called it what it was. A cage. I opened the schematics. The blueprints for the ankle monitor Leo was wearing appeared on the screen. I studied them, my eyes scanning the circuit logic. Gerald had updated the casing, made it sleeker, added the cellular connectivity, but the core architecture was mine. He was using my own invention to torture my son. The irony tasted like blood in my mouth. I needed to connect to it. I needed to see what was happening to Leo right now. I reached into a drawer and pulled out a black antenna. I plugged it into the USB port. I initiated a handshake protocol, searching for the unique signature of the device. Searching. Searching. Signal acquired. A map of Seattle appeared on the screen. A red dot pulsed at the location of Croft Manor. I zoomed in. The telemetry data started scrolling down the side of the screen. Heart rate, 110 beats per minute. High for a resting child. He was scared. Body temperature, normal. Device battery level, 98%. I was about to try a remote shutdown command when a warning line flashed in yellow text near the bottom of the data stream. Alert. Power cell integrity compromised. I froze. I typed a query command to isolate the battery diagnostics. The data expanded. The battery wasn't just draining, it was unstable. The impact of the device being dragged, or maybe a defect in the manufacturing, had caused a microfracture in the casing of the power cell. It was leaking lithium hexafluorophosphate. I knew exactly what that chemical did. It didn't just burn. It reacted with moisture on the skin to create hydrofluoric acid. It was slow-acting. At first, it would just feel like an itch. Then a heat. Then it would begin to eat through the tissue, down to the bone, poisoning the bloodstream as it went. I checked the rate of the leak. It was microscopic right now, but as the battery heated up from the GPS pinging, the pressure would build. The crack would widen. I did the math in my head. I didn't need a calculator. Based on the current voltage and the size of the fracture, the acid would breach the containment seal and make full contact with Leo's skin in approximately 6 hours. 6 hours. My breath hitched in my chest. This wasn't just about custody anymore. This wasn't about humiliation. This was a death sentence. If I didn't get that thing off his leg tonight, Leo wouldn't just be traumatized. He could lose his foot. He could go into toxic shock. I stared at the screen, my hands hovering over the keyboard. I could try to hack the release mechanism remotely. I started typing the unlock sequence. Access denied. Physical override required. Gerald had installed a fail-safe. Of course he had. The device could only be unlocked physically with a master key or a biometric scan from an authorized administrator. If I tried to force it via code, the anti-tamper protocol would trigger. It would shock Leo again. And worse, the voltage spike would accelerate the battery leak. I slammed my fist onto the desk. The pain in my hand grounded me. Panic was useless. Panic was for amateurs. I needed a plan. I needed equipment. And I needed to get into that manor, past a private security team that was armed to the teeth, and perform a delicate extraction on a bomb that was strapped to my son's leg. I stood up and turned to the metal cabinet in the corner of the room. It was locked with a heavy padlock. I didn't use a key. I picked up a paperclip from the desk, bent it, and popped the lock in 3 seconds. I swung the doors open. Inside, there were no guns. I had sold them years ago to pay for Leo's medical bills when he had pneumonia. But there were other things, tools of the trade that didn't rely on bullets. I picked up a pair of night vision goggles, old, bulky, but functional. I grabbed a signal jammer the size of a cigarette pack. I took a small, pristine pouch of surgical tools, scalpels, forceps, and microcutters. I ran my thumb over the edge of the scalpel. It was sharp enough to split a hair. Finally, I reached to the back of the shelf and pulled out a suit. It was a black waiter's uniform. I had kept it from an undercover job I did at a diplomatic gala 15 years ago. It smelled of mothballs. I held it up. It would be tight, but it would fit. I stripped off my wet clothes, leaving them in a pile on the floor. I dressed in the darkness of the secret room. The black trousers, the white shirt, the black vest. I tied the bow tie with efficient movements. I looked at myself in the reflection of the monitor again. Henry the watchmaker was gone. The ghost was back. I checked the time on the screen. 5 hours and 45 minutes left. Every second I wasted standing here was a second the acid was getting closer to my son's skin. But I couldn't do this alone. I was one man against a fortress. I needed eyes on the outside. I needed someone who knew the legal loopholes just in case I survived the night. I needed someone who hated the system as much as I did. I looked at the old rotary phone sitting on the shelf. It was a burner line, untraceable. I hadn't lifted that receiver in 5 years. The last time I spoke to him, he told me to rot in hell. He told me my conscience was a liability. I picked up the handset. The dial tone hummed in my ear. It sounded like an invitation to chaos. I dialed the number. I remembered it like I remembered my own Social Security number. 7 digits. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up, thinking he had changed his number or was dead in a ditch somewhere. Then there was a click. Yeah? The voice was raspy, sounding like it had been gargling gravel and whiskey. Who is this? I didn't introduce myself. I didn't say hello. I spoke in the code we used to use when the world was burning down around us. The watch is broken, Benny. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the background noise of a busy street, maybe a siren wailing in the distance. Henry? Benny's voice dropped an octave. You have been a ghost for a long time. Why are you haunting me now? I have a job, I said, my eyes fixed on the red dot pulsing on the screen. It is not for money. It is for blood. I'm listening, Benny said. I need a way into the Croft Gala, and I need to know if you still have that bypass card for the city power grid. You are crazy, Benny whispered, but I could hear the excitement creeping into his voice. That is suicide. Gerald Croft has enough security to invade a small country. I don't care, I said. He has my son. And he put a time bomb on his leg. The line went quiet again. Then I heard the sound of a lighter flicking and a deep inhale. Meet me at the hot dog stand on 4th and Pike in 20 minutes, Benny said. And Henry? Yeah? Bring your tools. We are going to need them. I hung up the phone. I grabbed the bag of equipment and slung it over my shoulder. I turned off the monitor, plunging the room back into darkness. I didn't look back at the empty apartment. There was nothing there for me anymore. My life, my real life, was waiting for me out in the rain, strapped to the ankle of an 8-year-old boy. I climbed out of the secret room, pushed the false panel shut, and walked out the front door. I didn't lock it this time. If I didn't come back tonight, it wouldn't matter who got in. And if I did come back, the world would be a very different place. I walked out into the storm, and for the first time in years, the thunder sounded like applause. The intersection of 4th and Pike in downtown Seattle is where dreams go to die, usually around midnight. The neon signs reflected on the wet pavement, creating a kaleidoscope of red and blue that did nothing to warm the air. I pulled my collar up against the relentless drizzle. My bag of tools felt heavy against my hip, a constant reminder of the war I was walking toward. I scanned the street. Most of the commuters were gone, replaced by the night shift workers and the lost souls looking for shelter. And there, on the corner, under a yellow and white striped umbrella that had seen better days, was the only man in this city I trusted with my life. Benny. 10 years ago, Benjamin Saul was the sharpest defense attorney in Washington state. He could talk a jury into believing the sky was green if it meant getting his client off the hook. He wore $3,000 suits and drove a Jaguar. Now, he was wearing a grease-stained apron and flipping hot dogs for tourists and drunks. The Bar Association had disbarred him after he tried to expose a corruption ring inside the district attorney's office, a ring that, coincidentally, was funded by Gerald Croft. Gerald had crushed Benny just like he crushed me. He took his license, his reputation, and his livelihood. But he couldn't take his brain. I approached the stand. The smell of grilled onions and cheap meat cut through the damp air. Benny was scraping down the griddle, his back to me. He looked older. His hair was thinning, and his shoulders were slumped, but his movements were still precise. Clinical. One with everything, Benny, I said, my voice blending with the traffic noise. Hold the onions. Benny didn't turn around immediately. He paused, the metal spatula hovering over the heat. I saw his shoulders stiffen. He recognized the voice. He recognized the order. It was the same thing I used to order when we met in the back of dive bars to exchange evidence folders. "We are closed, pal," Benny said, his voice rougher than I remembered. "I'm not hungry," I replied. "I just need a lawyer." Benny turned slowly. His eyes, dark and intelligent, narrowed as he took me in. He looked at the water dripping from my hair. He looked at the black waiter's uniform peeking out from under my flannel jacket. He looked at the bag on my shoulder. He didn't smile. There was no joy in this reunion, just a weary acknowledgement of a ghost. "Henry Cole," Benny said softly, "you look like something the cat dragged in and then decided wasn't worth eating. I need a place to talk, Benny. Somewhere without eyes." Benny sighed. He wiped his hands on a rag and reached under the counter. He flipped the switch that turned off the neon open sign. He gestured with his head toward a battered white delivery van parked at the curb behind the stand. "Get in the back," he said, "and don't touch the inventory." I climbed into the back of the van. It smelled of stale bread and mustard. I sat on a stack of soda crates. A minute later, the driver's door opened and Benny climbed into the front seat. He didn't start the engine. He just turned around, resting his arm on the back of the seat. The streetlights outside cast long, moving shadows across his face. "You have 5 minutes, Henry," Benny said, "before I realize this is a bad idea and kick you out." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I reached into my bag and pulled out the tablet I had synced with Leo's ankle monitor. I woke the screen. The red dot was still pulsing at the Croft Manor. The diagnostic lines were scrolling faster now. "Look at this," I said, passing the tablet to him. Benny squinted at the screen. He adjusted a pair of reading glasses that sat crooked on his nose. He scrolled through the data. At first, he looked confused. Then, as he recognized the file headers and the chemical readouts, his expression shifted to pure horror. "This is a containment protocol," Benny muttered. "This is the code for the max security prisons." "Where did you get this?" "It is on my son's leg, Benny." Benny looked up at me, his mouth slightly open. He knew Leo. He had held Leo when he was a baby, back before the world fell apart. "Gerald put a prisoner tag on an 8-year-old? Benny asked, his voice rising in disbelief. "It gets worse," I said. "Scroll down to line 42, the power cell diagnostics." Benny looked back at the screen. He read the line. He read it again. He tapped the screen, expanding the chemical breakdown. His face went pale in the dim light. He knew chemistry. You don't defend meth cooks for 10 years without learning a thing or two about volatile compounds. "Lithium hexafluorophosphate," Benny whispered. "Ruptured casing. Leakage rate is 0.02 milliliters per minute." He did the math. I saw the realization hit him like a physical blow. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. "Henry, this isn't a tracker. This is an acid bath waiting to happen. If that electrolyte touches the moisture on his skin, it will create hydrofluoric acid. It eats calcium. It seeks bone." I nodded. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it cracked. "I have less than 6 hours before the casing fails completely. The heat from the GPS pinging is accelerating the pressure. If I don't get it off him tonight, he loses his foot. Maybe more." Benny handed the tablet back to me as if it were radioactive. He ran a hand over his face, rubbing his eyes tiredly. "Call the police, Henry. Call the FBI. This is reckless endangerment. This is assault with a deadly weapon." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "And tell them what?" That the crazy old man who lost custody today claims the billionaire philanthropist is poisoning his grandson. By the time they get a warrant, by the time they get past Gerald's lawyers, the sun will be up. And Leo will be in the emergency room. Benny stayed silent. He knew I was right. The law was a shield for men like Gerald Croft, not a sword for men like us. So what is the plan? Benny asked quietly. And don't tell me you are going to knock on the front door. I am going to the gala, I said. I am going to walk right into the lion's den. I have the tools to surgically remove the device. But I can't get past the perimeter security systems. They have thermal cameras, motion sensors. It is a fortress. I paused, looking Benny dead in the eye. I need a blackout, Benny. Benny froze. He stared at me for a long time. The sound of the rain drumming on the metal roof of the van filled the silence. You want the grid key? He said. It wasn't a question. 6 years ago, before Benny was disbarred, he had represented a hacker who had compromised the Seattle municipal power grid. The hacker had given Benny a master access card, a skeleton key for the city's electrical substations, as payment. Benny had kept it as an insurance policy, or a souvenir. It is a felony, Henry, Benny whispered. A federal crime. Domestic terrorism. If we cut the power to that district, we are crossing a line we can never come back from. I leaned forward. The darkness in the van felt suffocating. They crossed the line when they put a bomb on my son, I said. I don't care about the law anymore, Benny. I care about the boy. You remember him. You remember his laugh. You remember how he used to call you Uncle Ben. Benny looked away, staring out the windshield at the wet street. I could see the conflict warring inside him. The lawyer who believed in the system versus the man who had been chewed up and spit out by it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He tapped one out, but didn't light it. He just rolled it between his fingers. Gerald Croft took my license, Benny said, his voice low. He took my wife's respect. He took my life. He broke the cigarette in half. And now he is hurting the kid. Benny turned back to me. The hesitation was gone. In its place was a cold, sharp anger. He reached under the driver's seat and pulled out a small, rusted lockbox. He keyed in a combination and popped the lid. Inside, resting on a velvet cushion, was a plain gray smart card with a magnetic strip. It looked innocent, but we both knew it could plunge 10 city blocks into darkness in 30 seconds. The substation for the Croft estate is on 5th Avenue, Benny said, handing me the card. It is an older junction box. This card will override the safety protocols. But Henry, listen to me. I took the card. It felt warm in my hand. Once you swipe this, you have 3 minutes before the backup generators kick in at the manor. 3 minutes of total darkness. That is your window to get past the outer wall. After that, the lights come back on, and you are trapped inside. 3 minutes, I repeated. I can work with that. Benny wasn't finished. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small earpiece. He tossed it to me. Put that in. I still have access to the police scanner frequencies. If the cops get called, I will warn you. I will be your eyes in the sky. Or, I guess, your eyes in the van. I put the earpiece in. It fit perfectly. Why are you doing this, Benny? I asked. You could walk away. You could keep flipping hot dogs and stay safe. Benny looked at me, a sad smile touching his lips. He started the engine. The van rumbled to life. Because you were right, Henry, he said. The hot dogs are terrible. And besides, I always hated that son of a bitch Gerald Croft. He put the van in gear. Get out, he said. Go save your boy. I will drive the van to a high point and monitor the frequencies. Don't die, Henry. You still owe me for the hot dog. I climbed out of the van back into the rain. I watched Benny drive away, the taillights fading into the mist. I gripped the access card in my pocket. I had the tools. I had the intel. And now I had the power of the city in my hands. I checked my watch. 5 hours left. I turned and started running toward the substation. The rain whipped against my face, but I didn't feel cold anymore. I felt like fire. The countdown had begun, and tonight the lights were going out on Gerald Croft's victory party. Forever. I stood in the shadow of a deactivated electrical substation, the hum of the city grid buzzing above my head like a hive of angry wasps. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the storm. I looked at the burner phone in my hand. The screen was cracked, a spider web of glass over the glowing numbers. This was it, the point of no return. I had the tools. I had the access card. I had the rage, but there was one last box I had to check before I crossed the line from desperate father to domestic terrorist. I had to give him a chance, not for his sake, but for mine. I needed to know with absolute certainty that there was no humanity left in Gerald Croft. I needed to know that when I walked into that building tonight, I wasn't fighting a man. I was fighting a monster. I dialed his personal number. It was a line only 5 people in the world had. I was one of them, a relic from the days when he still pretended to respect me. It rang 4 times. I visualized him standing in his ballroom, surrounded by senators and investors, checking the caller ID with a frown of annoyance. "Hello?" His voice was smooth, lubricated by expensive scotch and the adoration of the crowd. In the background, I could hear a string quartet playing Vivaldi. The contrast between his world of velvet and champagne and my world of concrete and acid made my hand shake. "It is leaking, Gerald." I didn't say hello. I didn't identify myself. I knew he knew my voice. "Henry," he sighed, the sound of a man dealing with a telemarketer. "I thought we established the rules of engagement. You stay away. The boy stays here. If you call again, I will have your phone disconnected. I own the carrier, remember?" "Listen to me," I said, keeping my voice low, fighting the urge to scream. "I am not playing games." I accessed the diagnostics on the ankle monitor. The power cell has a microfracture. The lithium is reacting with the moisture in the air. It is creating hydrofluoric acid. There was a pause on the line. For a second, I thought I had reached him. I thought the grandfather in him might actually wake up. Then he chuckled. "You accessed the diagnostics? That is rich, Henry. You can barely work on microwave. Who did you hire? Some hack from the internet trying to scare me?" "I did not hire anyone," I said. "I built the system, Gerald. You stole it, remember? But you never understood how the thermal shielding works. The casing is compromised. In less than 5 hours, that acid is going to burn through the plastic. It will eat through Leo's skin. It will dissolve his Achilles tendon. He will be crippled, Gerald. Permanently." The music in the background swelled. I heard the clink of glass against glass. "You have a vivid imagination," Gerald said, his voice dropping to a cold, bored monotone. "Let me tell you what is actually happening. You are sitting in your sad little apartment, looking for any excuse to ruin my night. You want me to panic. You want me to take the device off so you can swoop in and claim victory. It is pathetic. It is not a bluff," I shouted, my voice echoing off the brick walls of the alley. "Check the heat signature. Check the voltage drop. If you don't believe me, send your tech team to look at his leg. Just pull up his pant leg, Gerald. That is all I am asking." "Henry, listen to me very carefully," Gerald hissed. "I am in the middle of closing a contract with the Defense Department worth $400 million. The selling point of this device is that it is tamper-proof. If I take it off now, in front of the generals, I look weak, I look unsure. That is not going to happen. He is 8 years old, I roared. He is your blood. He is an asset. Gerald snapped, losing his composure for the first time. And right now, he is the only leverage I have to keep you in line. The device stays on until the papers are signed tomorrow morning. If his leg gets a little red, we have doctors. We have plastic surgeons. I can buy him a new leg if I have to. But I cannot buy a new reputation. The words hung in the air between us, suspended on the invisible signal connecting us. I can buy him a new leg. That was it. That was. The final thread snapped. The last piece of Henry the watchmaker, the peaceful man, the law-abiding citizen, turned to ash and blew away in the wind. I closed my eyes. A strange calm washed over me. It was the calm of the deep ocean, dark and crushing. "Okay, Gerald," I whispered. "Okay?" he asked, sounding surprised by my sudden surrender. "You finally get it?" "Yes," I said. "I get it. You are a businessman. You deal in assets and liabilities." "Exactly," Gerald said, his voice returning to its smug purr. "Now go to sleep, Henry. When you wake up, I will wire $10,000 to your account. Go take a vacation. Go somewhere warm. Forget about this." I opened my eyes. I looked at the gray access card in my other hand. "I don't want your money, Gerald." "Then what do you want?" "I want you to look at the time," I said. "What?" "Look at your watch, Gerald." I heard him hesitate. I imagined him glancing at his $20,000 Rolex. "It is 8:45, he said. "So what?" "Remember that time?" I said. "Because that was the last minute you had everything." I ended the call. I didn't smash the phone. I carefully removed the battery and the SIM card, wiping them clean with the edge of my shirt. I dropped the pieces into a storm drain. I watched them disappear into the black water below. I was done with words. Words were for people who believed in the social contract. Words were for men who thought the police would come if they dialed 911. But men like Gerald Croft didn't live by the law. They lived above it. They built castles on the backs of the weak and surrounded themselves with walls of money. The only way to reach a man like that is to tear the walls down. I checked my gear one last time. The night vision goggles were secure around my neck. The signal jammer was fully charged, its green light blinking in the darkness. The pouch of surgical tools was strapped to my thigh, hidden beneath the loose fabric of the waiter's trousers. I looked up at the skyline. I could see the glow of the Croft estate from here, a beacon of golden light on the hill, mocking the darkness of the city below. They were up there, drinking their wine, laughing at their jokes, thinking they were untouchable. They thought the rain was the only thing that could touch them tonight. They were wrong. I adjusted the earpiece in my ear. Static hissed. Then Benny's voice came through, clear and anxious. "Henry? You there? The patrol car just passed the south gate. You have a window." "I am here, Benny," I said. "Did you call him? Did he listen?" "No," I said, starting to walk toward the chain-link fence that separated the city grid from the private road. "He didn't listen. He thinks he is a god." There was a pause. Then Benny spoke, his voice grim. "Gods bleed too, Henry, if you cut them deep enough." I reached the fence. I didn't climb it. I used the bolt cutters from my bag, slicing through the metal links with precise, silent snaps. I peeled back the opening, creating a hole just big enough for a ghost to slip through. I stepped onto the property of Croft Dynamics. The grass was wet and perfectly manicured. "I am not going to make him bleed, Benny," I said, moving into the tree line, merging with the shadows. "I am going to make him beg." I moved fast now, my body remembering the rhythm of the hunt. I wasn't running. I was flowing. Every step was calculated. Every breath was silent. The ultimatum had been delivered, and it had been rejected. The time for negotiation was over. The court was closed. The judge was absent. Tonight, I was the judge. I was the jury. And if I didn't make it to Leo in time, I would be the executioner. I reached the outer wall of the substation that powered the estate. I pulled out the gray card Benny had given me. It looked so small, so insignificant, but I knew what it represented. It was the off switch for their entire world. I held the card up to the reader. The light on the panel turned from red to green. "Lights out, Gerald," I whispered. I pushed the door open and stepped into the hum of the high-voltage transformers. The nightmare was about to begin. But this time, it was their nightmare, not mine. When the lights went out, the silence hit before the darkness did. The hum of the massive transformers behind me cut off with a dying groan, and for a split second, the world held its breath. Then the blackness swallowed the hill. The golden glow of the Croft estate, which had been polluting the night sky for miles, vanished instantly. The music stopped. The laughter died. I didn't wait to hear the screams. I moved. My body was 68 years old. My knees were grinding bone on bone, and my lungs burned from the cold, damp air. But muscle memory is a powerful thing. It doesn't care about arthritis. It doesn't care about age. It only cares about the objective. And my objective was 400 yards away, across a manicured lawn that was now a pitch-black killing field. I slipped the night vision goggles over my eyes. The world shifted from suffocating black to a grainy, glowing green. It wasn't the high-definition clarity you see in movies. It was messy. It was distorted. But it was enough. Through the green haze, I saw the chaos erupt at the main gate. The private security contractors were panicking. They were waving flashlights, their beams cutting through the rain like frantic lightsabers. They were shouting into their radios, but I knew no one was answering. The signal jammer in my pocket was doing its job, creating a dead zone of white noise around the perimeter. I kept low, moving in a crouch. The wet grass soaked through my trousers instantly. I used the landscaping to my advantage, darting from the cover of a rhododendron bush to the trunk of an ancient oak tree. I breathed in a rhythm, in for 2 steps, out for 2 steps. Keep the heart rate down. Keep the hands steady. A beam of light swept over the grass, inches from my boot. I froze. A guard was running past, not 20 feet away. He was young, maybe 25, pumped full of adrenaline and confusion. He had a submachine gun strapped to his chest, and his finger was hovering near the trigger. I didn't breathe. I became part of the tree bark. I watched his heat signature in the green lens. He was looking for a threat he could see. He wasn't looking for a shadow. "They cut the lines!" the guard shouted to someone I couldn't see. "We are blind out here!" "Switch to backup!" a voice yelled back from the darkness. "Get the generator online!" I checked the internal clock in my head. I had burned 45 seconds. The backup generators for a place like this were industrial grade. They would have a delay of maybe 3 minutes before they fully kicked in and restored power to the floodlights. 3 minutes to cross open ground. 3 minutes to breach a fortress. I pushed off the tree and ran. I didn't run like a young man. I ran with a low center of gravity, ignoring the screaming protest of my lower back. I aimed for the west wing of the manor. I knew the blueprints. I knew that the kitchen service entrance was located near the delivery bay, and it was the one door that was often propped open by staff stepping out for a smoke. The rain was my ally. It masked the sound of my boots on the gravel. It masked the sound of my heavy breathing. I reached the delivery bay. Two large dumpsters provided cover. I slid behind one, the smell of rotting garbage and expensive seafood filling my nose. I peeked around the corner. The service door was closed, but it wasn't locked. It had a magnetic keypad. I pulled the gray access card from my pocket. In the dark, without power, the magnetic lock should have disengaged. That is the design flaw of most secure systems. They default to open for fire safety reasons when the grid goes down. I reached for the handle. Suddenly the door flew open. I pressed myself back against the cold metal of the dumpster. A man in a white chef's jacket stumbled out into the rain, holding a lighter. He was cursing loudly in French. He didn't see me. He was too busy trying to light a cigarette with trembling hands. I had a choice. I could take him out. A sleeper hold. Quick. Quiet. But then I would have a body to hide. And a missing chef would raise alarms faster than a ghost. I waited. The seconds ticked by in my head. 1 minute 30 left. The chef finally got his cigarette lit. The flame illuminated his face. He looked terrified. The blackout had spooked the staff. He took a long drag, exhaled a cloud of smoke, and turned to go back inside. As the door started to swing shut behind him, I moved. I caught the edge of the door with the toe of my boot just before it clicked into the frame. I waited for the chef's footsteps to fade down the hallway. Then, I slipped inside. The transition was jarring. I was out of the wind and rain, standing in a tiled hallway that smelled of roasting meat and baking bread. I stripped off the night vision goggles and shoved them into my bag. I peeled off the wet flannel jacket and stuffed it into the bottom of a laundry hamper sitting in the hall. Underneath, I was wearing the black trousers, the white shirt, and the black vest. I smoothed my hair back. I stood up straight. I wasn't an intruder anymore. I was staff. Just as I adjusted my bow tie, a low rumble shook the floorboards. The lights in the hallway flickered, buzzed, and then flared to blinding life. The generators had kicked in. I blinked against the sudden brightness. My eyes watered. I had made it inside with 10 seconds to spare. Now came the hard part. I picked up a silver tray that had been left on a side table. It was empty, but it was a prop. A prop is a shield. If you carry a tray and look annoyed, people assume you belong. I walked down the hallway toward the main kitchen. The noise hit me first. It was pandemonium. There were at least 20 cooks running around, shouting orders. The blackout had interrupted the dinner service for the most important night of Gerald Croft's year. Soufflés had collapsed. Sauces had broken. Panic was the main course. I stepped into the kitchen. It was a cavernous room of stainless steel and steam. "Where is the reserve champagne?" a voice bellowed. A large man in a tall white hat, the head chef, was screaming at a terrified busboy. The busboy was stammering, looking ready to cry. I didn't hesitate. I walked right through the middle of the room. I walked with purpose. I kept my eyes on the swinging doors at the far end that led to the ballroom. "You!" the chef barked. I stopped. I didn't turn around fast. That would look guilty. I turned slowly, balancing the tray on one hand. I looked at him with the weary expression of a man who is underpaid and overworked. "Me, chef?" I asked. "Grab a case of Dom Perignon from the cellar and get it to the VIP room. The lights going out has made the investors nervous. We need to get them drunk before they start checking their stock portfolios." "Yes, chef," I said. "Right away." He turned back to his sauce. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I was invisible. I was a servant. To men like the chef and to men like Gerald, I was just a pair of hands. I wasn't a threat. I pushed through the swinging doors and entered the service corridors of the main house. The atmosphere here was different. The kitchen was chaotic, but this was tense. Security guards were stationed at every intersection. They were speaking into their earpieces, their hands resting on their holsters. "Perimeter breach confirmed," I heard one of them say as I walked past, keeping my head down. "Someone cut the fence at Sector 4. "We have a runner?" the other guard asked. "Unknown. Sensors are rebooting. Keep eyes on the guests." I walked past them. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought they could hear it. I focused on the tray. I focused on the texture of the silver under my fingertips. I was just a waiter. Just a waiter. I needed to get to the second floor. That was where the VIP lounge was. That was where they were keeping Leo. But the main staircase would be swarming with guests. I had to use the service elevator. I turned a corner and saw it. The elevator doors were closed. But standing in front of them was a man I recognized. It wasn't a regular guard. It was the head of Gerald's personal detail. A man named Voss. I knew his file. Ex-mercenary. Dishonorably discharged for excessive force. He wasn't looking at the guests. He was watching the staff. He was watching me. I slowed my pace, but I didn't stop. Stopping is suspicious. "Hold it," Voss said. His voice was like grinding gravel. I stopped. I turned to face him. I made sure my hands were visible, still holding the tray. "Sir," I said. "I haven't seen you before," Voss said. He took a step closer. He was a giant of a man, smelling of tobacco and gun oil. He looked at my face while he looked at the lines around my eyes. "You are old for a runner." "I need the work, sir," I said, keeping my voice raspy. "Retirement doesn't pay much." Voss narrowed his eyes. He looked at my shoes. They were wet, muddy. I had forgotten to wipe them. "Why are your boots muddy?" he asked. "I dropped a crate of wine on the loading dock." I lied instantly. "The chef made me go out and clean it up in the rain. He docked my pay for the breakage." It was a good lie. It played into their prejudice. Of course the help would be clumsy. Of course the chef would be cruel. Voss stared at me for another long second. His hand twitched toward his radio. "Let me see your ID badge," he said. My blood ran cold. I didn't have a badge. Benny hadn't been able to forge one in time. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the handle of the surgical scalpel in my belt. If I had to, I would use it. I mapped the strike points on his neck, the carotid artery, the windpipe. It would be messy. It would blow my cover. But I wasn't going to let a badge stop me. I fumbled in my pocket, pretending to search. I looked panic-stricken. I must have left it in my locker, sir. Please don't tell the manager. He will fire me. I really need this job." Voss looked at me with pure contempt. He saw a pathetic old man begging for scraps. He saw weakness. And because he was a predator, he lost interest. Predators don't hunt dead things. "Get out of my face," Voss sneered. "Use the stairs. The elevator is for security use only tonight." "Thank you, sir. Thank you." I bowed my head and scurried away toward the service stairwell. I felt his eyes on my back until the heavy fire door closed behind me. I leaned against the concrete wall of the stairwell, my legs trembling. That was too close. The mud on my boots. A rookie mistake. I was getting sloppy. Or maybe I was just getting old. I checked my watch. 4 hours and 30 minutes left. I started climbing the stairs. Each step was a battle. My knees burned. My breath came in ragged gasps. But I thought of Leo. I thought of the acid eating at the plastic casing. I thought of the fear in his eyes when the lightning flashed. I reached the second-floor landing. I cracked the door open. The hallway was lined with velvet carpet and silk wallpaper. This was the inner sanctum. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. I could hear Gerald's voice booming from the end of the hall. He was giving a speech. And with the Croft Guardian, we are not just selling security. We are selling peace of mind. I crept down the hallway, moving from shadow to shadow. I passed open doors where people were laughing, drinking, oblivious to the fact that a man was hunting in their midst. I reached the door to the VIP holding room. It was guarded by a single man. He was looking at his phone, probably reading about the blackout on Twitter. I didn't have time for tricks. I didn't have time for disguises. I set the silver tray down on the floor. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small syringe. It was a sedative I had mixed myself. Fast-acting. Clean. I walked up to the guard. He looked up, surprised to see a waiter so close. "Can I get you a drink, sir?" I asked. Before he could answer, I moved. I stepped inside his guard, grabbed his wrist, and jammed the needle into the side of his neck. He gasped, his eyes going wide. He tried to reach for his gun, but his arm was already heavy. He slumped against me. I caught him, taking his weight so he wouldn't make a noise when he fell. I dragged him into a nearby closet and propped him up against a mop bucket. "Sleep tight," I whispered. I stepped back into the hall and turned to the door of the VIP room. My hand rested on the knob. On the other side of this wood was my son, and the bomb strapped to his leg. I took a deep breath. I adjusted my bow tie one last time. I twisted the knob and pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit. Leo was sitting on a leather couch, his knees pulled up to his chest. He looked small. He looked broken. A man in a white coat, the family doctor, was standing over him, holding a syringe of painkillers. "Hold still, boy," the doctor was saying. "This will numb the burn." "Get away from him," I said. The doctor turned. Leo looked up. "Dad?" Leo whispered. The doctor frowned. "Who are you?" "You can't be in here." I locked the door behind me. I slid the deadbolt home. "I am the janitor," I said, walking toward him, the scalpel sliding into my hand. "And I am here to take out the trash." I locked the door to the VIP room from the inside, leaving my son and the unconscious doctor safe for the moment. But safety was an illusion. The lock was flimsy. The door was wood. And the real monster wasn't the hired help I had just neutralized. The real monster was the bloodline that owned this building. I knew I couldn't just carry Leo out the front door. The backup generators were fully online now, and the security grid was rebooting. The cameras would be sweeping the halls in less than 2 minutes. I needed a ghost route. I needed the service tunnels that ran beneath the foundation, the ones that didn't appear on the guest maps. I stepped back out into the corridor. The air here was colder than the plush hallway I had just left. It smelled of industrial cleaner and ozone. This was the spine of the house, the technical corridor that connected the luxury above to the machinery below. I moved fast, my boots making no sound on the concrete floor. My destination was the freight elevator at the end of the hall. It was the only way down that bypassed the main security checkpoints. I was 10 feet from the elevator when the doors chimed. I froze. There was nowhere to hide. The walls were bare. The lights were humming with the harsh glare of halogen. The metal doors slid open. Douglas Croft stepped out. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo anymore. He had changed into a tactical vest over his dress shirt, and he was holding a silenced pistol loosely at his side. He looked like a child playing soldier, but the gun was very real. He saw me instantly. He didn't look surprised. He looked delighted. "Well, well," Douglas said, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his face. "The rat is out of his hole." I stood my ground. I didn't raise my hands. I didn't beg. I just watched him. I analyzed him. I saw the way he held the weapon. His grip was too loose. His finger was already on the trigger, which was a rookie mistake. He was arrogant. He thought the gun made him a god. He didn't know that a gun in the hand of an amateur is just a paperweight waiting to be taken. "Where is the boy, Henry?" Douglas asked, taking a step toward me. The elevator doors closed behind him, cutting off my escape. "He is safe," I said. My voice was calm. It wasn't the voice of a scared old man. It was the voice of the operator I used to be. "Safe?" Douglas laughed. It was a hollow, barking sound. "He is property, Henry. He is an investment. Do you have any idea how much the Department of Defense is paying for the data on his leg? We are tracking his stress levels, his pain threshold. He is a gold mine, and you are trespassing in a corporate vault." He raised the gun, pointing it directly at my chest. The black eye of the silencer stared at me. "Get on your knees, old man. I want to see you beg before I put a bullet in your leg. I promised my father I wouldn't kill you, but he didn't say anything about making you walk with a cane for the rest of your miserable life." I looked at his eyes. They were empty. There was no soul there, just greed and a lifetime of being told he was special. He was 35 years old, in the prime of his life, facing a 68-year-old pensioner. He thought the math was on his side. He was wrong. Math isn't about age. Math is about leverage. Math is about speed. I took a slow breath. I relaxed my shoulders. I let my hands hang loose at my sides. "You are right, Douglas," I said softly. "I am just an old man." I saw his shoulders drop a fraction of an inch. He bought it. He bought the surrender. That was his fatal error. I didn't get on my knees. I exploded forward. The distance between us was 8 feet. I closed it in less than a second. Douglas blinked. His brain couldn't process the speed. He tried to tighten his finger on the trigger, but I was already inside his guard. My left hand swept up, slapping the barrel of the gun to the side. The weapon discharged. The bullet bit into the concrete wall behind me with a sharp crack, missing my ear by inches. I didn't flinch. I didn't hear it. My right hand, rigid as a steel bar, drove into his throat. It wasn't a punch. It was a strike designed to collapse the windpipe. I pulled it back at the last microsecond, just enough to incapacitate, not to kill. I felt the cartilage give way under my palm. Douglas made a wet, choking sound. His eyes went wide with shock. The gun slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. He stumbled back, clutching his throat, trying to suck in air that wouldn't come. But I wasn't done. You don't start a fight with a Croft unless you finish it. I grabbed his wrist and twisted it behind his back, applying pressure to the rotator cuff. He screamed, a gargled, high-pitched noise. I spun him around and slammed him face first into the concrete wall. The impact was sickening. His nose crunched against the block. His knees buckled. I kicked his legs out from under him. He hit the floor hard. I dropped a knee onto his spine, pinning him to the ground. The tactical vest he was wearing, the symbol of his fake power, was now just extra weight holding him down. The whole engagement had taken 6 seconds. I leaned down, my mouth close to his ear. He was wheezing, blood bubbling from his broken nose, staining the pristine concrete. He smelled of expensive cologne and fear. "You think you are a soldier because you bought a vest?" I whispered. "You think you are a predator because you hurt a child?" I reached into his pocket. I wasn't looking for money. I was looking for the master key card, the one that opened every door in the complex, including the service tunnels. My fingers closed around the hard plastic. I pulled it out. Douglas tried to speak. He tried to threaten me, but all that came out was a whimper. "Please," he choked out. I stood up. I looked down at him. He looked like a broken doll. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement was gone. All that was left was a scared little boy who had finally met a real man. I picked up the silenced pistol from the floor. I ejected the magazine and pocketed it. I pulled back the slide, ejecting the chambered round. I tossed the empty gun onto his chest. "Tell your father something for me," I said. Douglas looked up at me with one swelling eye. "Tell him the warranty on his security just expired." I turned and walked toward the freight elevator. My heart was beating slow and steady. The adrenaline was a cold river in my veins. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew he wasn't getting up. I swiped Douglas's keycard. The elevator doors opened instantly. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the sub-basement. As the doors closed, shutting out the sight of the man writhing on the floor, I checked my watch. 4 hours left. I had the key. I had the route. Now I just had to get back to the VIP room, grab my son, and vanish into the earth before the rest of the army arrived. But as the elevator descended, I felt something shift inside me. The satisfaction of taking Douglas down wasn't enough. It was just an appetizer. The main course was still waiting in the ballroom. Gerald, the man who signed the checks, the man who gave the orders. Douglas was just a symptom. Gerald was the disease. And tonight, I was the cure. The elevator rattled as it went down. I looked at my reflection in the polished metal doors. There was a smear of blood on my white shirt. It wasn't mine. I adjusted my bow tie. I closed my eyes for a second, picturing Leo's face. I pictured the red mark on his ankle. The anger I felt wasn't hot anymore. It was cold. It was absolute. The elevator chimed. The doors opened into the darkness of the service tunnels. I stepped out. "I am coming for you, Leo," I whispered. "And God help anyone else who stands in my way." The scalpel in my hand caught the low light of the VIP room, a sliver of silver that looked out of place against the plush velvet furniture. The family doctor, a man named Vance who had been on the Croft payroll for 20 years, backed away from me until his spine hit the mahogany wet bar. He was holding a syringe of morphine like a shield, his hands shaking so violently the liquid was foaming inside the barrel. I did not run at him. I did not shout. I walked toward him with the heavy, measured steps of a man who has already decided the outcome. "You can't be here," Vance stammered, his eyes darting to the door I had just locked. "Security is on the way." Mr. Croft said. I didn't let him finish the sentence. I didn't care what Mr. Croft said. I cared about the Hippocratic oath this man had shredded the moment he agreed to drug a child instead of treating him. I stepped inside his personal space. I smelled the stale coffee on his breath and the expensive cologne that tried to mask the scent of his own fear. "Drop it," I said. Vance hesitated. He looked at the syringe, then at my scalpel. He was a man of medicine, but he was soft. He had spent his career treating gout for board members and writing prescriptions for bored housewives. He had never seen violence. I had lived in it. He lunged. It was a pathetic, desperate motion. He tried to jam the needle toward my neck. I caught his wrist mid-air. It felt fragile, like dry wood. I applied 3 pounds of pressure to the ulnar nerve. Vance gasped, his fingers springing open involuntarily. The syringe dropped to the carpet, bouncing harmlessly. I didn't break his arm. That would have been loud. Instead, I spun him around and applied a sleeper hold. It is a kindness, really. It restricts the blood flow to the brain just enough to induce unconsciousness without causing permanent damage. Vance struggled for 3 seconds. He clawed at my sleeve, his heels drumming against the cabinet. Then, he went limp. A heavy, dead weight in my arms. I lowered him to the floor, tucking him behind the leather sofa. I checked his pulse. Strong, regular. He would wake up in 20 minutes with a headache, wondering why he was on the floor. By then, the world would have changed. I turned my back on him. He was a distraction. The real patient was sitting on the couch. Leo. My son was awake, but his eyes were glassy. The painkillers Vance had already administered were dulling his senses, but they couldn't hide the fear. He looked at me, and then he looked at the unconscious doctor, and then he looked at the black box on his ankle. "Dad," he whispered. "It hurts. It feels like a bee sting that won't stop." I knelt in front of him. I put my hands on his knees. I forced my breathing to slow down. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that wanted me to grab him and run. But I couldn't run. Not yet. If I moved him now, the friction would rupture the battery completely. The acid would pour out. "I am going to take it off, Leo," I said, my voice steady. "But I need you to be very brave. I need you to be a statue. Can you do that for me? Like we play in the park?" Leo nodded. A single tear tracked through the grime on his cheek. I reached into my bag and pulled out my tools. I laid them out on the coffee table, pushing aside a crystal vase of white roses. The juxtaposition made my stomach turn. The beauty of the flowers, the ugliness of the torture device. I pulled out a pair of magnifying spectacles and slid them onto my nose. I clicked the side light on. A focused beam of white light hit the ankle monitor. I inhaled sharply. It was worse than the diagnostics had shown. The plastic casing around the power cell was bulging. A hairline fracture ran down the side, and I could see a faint yellow residue weeping from the crack. It was touching the fabric of Leo's sock. The acid hadn't reached the skin yet, but it was millimeters away. The heat radiating from the device was palpable. It was cooking itself. I picked up the microcutter. It was a tool designed for dismantling watches, for cutting gears that were thinner than a human hair. "I need to cut the casing without touching the circuit loop," I muttered to myself. Suddenly, a sound boomed from the ceiling speakers. It wasn't an alarm, it was applause. The audio feed from the ballroom was being piped into the VIP rooms so the guests wouldn't miss the speeches. "Ladies and gentlemen," the voice of Gerald Croft echoed through the room, magnified, distorted, omnipresent. "Thank you for your patience. A minor technical glitch with the weather, nothing more. But the lights are back on, and the future is brighter than ever." I gritted my teeth. I focused on the black plastic. I inserted the tip of the cutter into the seam of the device. Gerald continued, his voice dripping with false humility. "Tonight is not just about a product. It is about family. It is about the lengths we go to protect the ones we love. When I designed the Croft Guardian, I was thinking of my own grandson, Leo." My hand slipped. The metal tip of the cutter scraped against the battery housing. A spark jumped. Leo flinched. "Sorry," I whispered. "Sorry, buddy. Stay still." "I'm okay, Dad," Leo said, his voice trembling. "Just get it off." I took a breath. I blocked out Gerald's voice. I blocked out the applause. I became the machine. I visualized the schematic I had seen in my basement. The tamper mechanism was a pressure plate located directly under the GPS chip. If I relieved the pressure on the strap too quickly, the plate would lift, the circuit would close, and the capacitor would dump 5,000 volts into my son's leg. I had to trick the machine into thinking it was still attached. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thin shim of conductive copper. I had grabbed it from my workbench at the last second. I slid the copper shim between the strap and Leo's skin. He winced as the cold metal touched his ankle. "This is going to feel tight," I said. I used a pair of forceps to pull the strap tighter, compressing the flesh. Leo sucked in a breath through his teeth. I needed to create a gap between the sensor and the locking mechanism. On the speakers, Gerald was laughing. "Some people say that security is expensive. I say, what is the price of innocence? What is the price of knowing your child is safe?" I twisted the cutter. The outer shell of the lock snapped. A piece of black plastic fell onto the white carpet. I could see the wiring now. A nest of red, blue, and yellow filaments. It was a mess. Gerald's engineers had done a sloppy job. They had crammed the components in without shielding. The heat from the battery was melting the insulation on the wires. The red wire, the trigger wire, was bare. It was vibrating slightly with the pulse of the current. If that red wire touched the metal casing, it was game over. I picked up the scalpel. I needed to sever the connection to the capacitor before I cut the strap. I moved the blade toward the red wire. My hand, usually rock steady, developed a microscopic tremor. I was 68 years old. I had been beaten, kicked, and frozen in the rain. My body was failing me at the worst possible moment. "Come on, Henry," I hissed to myself. "Just one cut." From the hallway, I heard footsteps, heavy boots, radios crackling. "Sector 2 is clear," a voice shouted. "Check the VIP rooms. Voss wants a head count." They were coming. I had maybe 60 seconds before they tried the door. I looked at Leo. He was staring at the door, his eyes wide with terror. "Look at me, Leo," I commanded softly. "Don't look at the door. Look at me. Trust me." I gripped his ankle with my left hand to stabilize it. I brought the scalpel down. I didn't slash. I pressed the blade against the copper wire, using the bone of the ankle as a fulcrum, but stopping a millimeter before the skin. Gerald's voice reached a crescendo. "And so I am proud to demonstrate the unbreakable bond of the Croft Guardian." I severed the wire. There was a pop. A tiny puff of blue smoke rose from the device. The red LED light on the side of the box flickered and died. The bomb was disarmed, but it was still locked. I didn't have time to pick the secondary lock. I grabbed a heavy pair of pliers from the bag. "Close your eyes, Leo." I jammed the jaws of the pliers into the gap I had made in the casing. I used both hands. I leveraged every ounce of old man strength I had left in my shoulders. I twisted. Plastic crunched. Metal groaned. Outside, someone tried the door handle. It rattled. "Open the door," a guard shouted. "Security check." I pulled harder. The veins in my neck stood out. The device dug into Leo's leg. He let out a whimper of pain. "Almost there," I grunted. With a final sickening crack, the hinge of the ankle monitor shattered. The device sprang open like a dead clam. It fell from Leo's leg and landed on the carpet with a heavy thud. I grabbed it. It was hot to the touch, burning my palm. I looked at Leo's ankle. The skin was angry red, indented, and blistered from the heat, but it wasn't dissolved. The acid hadn't broken through. He still had his foot. "Daddy!" Leo threw his arms around my neck, burying his face in my chest. He was shaking violently now, the adrenaline crash hitting him. I held him tight for 1 second. Just 1 second. I smelled his hair. I felt his heartbeat. Then the door handle rattled again. Harder this time. A shoulder slammed against the wood. "Open up or we breach!" I pulled away from Leo. I stood up. I looked at the broken device on the floor. I looked at the unconscious doctor. I looked at the door that was about to splinter inward. I picked up the broken ankle monitor. I shoved it into my pocket. It was evidence. It was the weapon. I grabbed a wet towel from the bar and wrapped it around Leo's ankle. "Can you walk?" I asked him. Leo nodded, sliding off the couch. He winced when his foot touched the ground, but he stood. He was a Croft, but he had my blood too. He was a survivor. I picked him up. He was heavy, too heavy for my aching back, but I didn't feel the weight. I walked to the window. We were on the second floor. Outside, there was a narrow ledge that ran along the side of the building, leading to the drain pipes. It was a route for a cat burglar, not a grandfather carrying a child. But the door behind me cracked. A splinter of wood flew across the room. I opened the window. The cold night air rushed in, smelling of rain and freedom. "Hold on tight, Leo," I whispered. "Don't look down." I stepped out onto the ledge just as the door to the VIP room exploded inward. I heard the guards shouting. I heard them checking the closet. I heard them finding the doctor. But they didn't see us. We were already gone, swallowed by the shadows, moving toward the main ballroom. I wasn't escaping. I wasn't running away. I was heading toward the stage. Gerald was down there, basking in the applause. He thought he had won. He thought his secret was safe in a locked room. He didn't know that the ghost was coming down the drainpipe, and the ghost was bringing the truth with him. The applause in the grand ballroom sounded like rain on a tin roof. It was a wall of noise, manufactured and polite, fueled by expensive champagne and the desperate need to be seen on the right side of power. I stood in the heavy velvet shadows of the stage wings, holding my son against my chest. Leo had stopped shivering. He was clinging to me with a strength that defied his size, burying his face in the crook of my neck so he wouldn't have to see the monsters in the tuxedos. Out there, in the blinding wash of the spotlights, Gerald Croft was glowing. He stood at the lucite podium like a televangelist, his arms spread wide, basking in the adoration of the military generals and venture capitalists who were about to make him a trillionaire. Behind him, a massive LED screen, 60 feet wide, displayed the rotating gold logo of Croft Dynamics. "We do not just build technology," Gerald boomed, his voice amplified to reach the back of the room. "We build trust. When you put a Croft Guardian on your child, or your soldier, or your prisoner, you are securing the future. You are saying that chaos has no place here. You are saying that order is worth any price." I stepped closer to the edge of the curtain. My boots left muddy prints on the polished stage floor. The blood from the fight with Douglas was drying on my shirt, a stark crimson stain against the white fabric. I looked like a specter of war invading a palace of peace. I looked down at the tablet in my hand. It was cracked, battery dying, connected to the estate's AV system via the ghost network I had activated in the basement. Benny's voice crackled in my ear, faint but clear. "I have the uplink, Henry. The firewall is down. The stage is yours." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just tapped the enter key on the screen. Out on the stage, Gerald was building to his crescendo. "This device is flawless. It is unbreakable. It is the ultimate shield for the ones we low." The sound system shrieked. It wasn't feedback. It was the sound of a digital scream, a harsh electronic tear that made 500 people cover their ears instantly. The massive screen behind Gerald flickered violently. The golden logo distorted, melted, and then vanished. The ballroom plunged into a confused silence. Gerald tapped the microphone, looking annoyed. "Technical difficulties," he joked, forcing a smile. "It seems the storm is still messing with our—" Then the screen flared to life again, but it wasn't gold anymore. It was red. Giant scrolling lines of code appeared, moving so fast they blurred. Then a map, a satellite view of the estate, and right in the center, a pulsing red dot. Then came the audio. It was the recording I had made earlier, the conversation from the VIP room. But it wasn't just audio. I had synced it with the thermal imaging logs from the ankle monitor. On the 60-foot screen, a graph appeared. It showed temperature spikes. It showed chemical leakage rates. And Gerald's voice, clear as a bell, echoed through the ballroom. "If his leg gets a little red, we have doctors. I can buy him a new leg if I have to." The crowd gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. Gerald froze. He looked back at the screen, his face draining of color. He looked like a man who had just seen his own obituary. "Turn it off!" he screamed at the sound booth. "Cut the feed!" But the feed didn't cut. Instead, the screen switched to a live camera view. It was the camera I had hacked in the VIP room. It showed the empty couch. It showed the unconscious doctor on the floor. And it showed the broken pieces of the ankle monitor lying on the carpet like shrapnel. That was my cue. I didn't run out. I didn't shout. I walked. I stepped out from the curtains and into the harsh glare of the spotlight. The light blinded me for a second, but I didn't blink. I kept walking. The silence in the room changed. It wasn't confused anymore. It was terrified. The audience saw me. They saw the old man in the waiter's uniform. They saw the mud. They saw the blood. And they saw the boy in my arms, his leg wrapped in a wet towel. Gerald turned slowly. When he saw me, his knees actually buckled. He grabbed the podium to keep from falling. "Henry," he whispered. The microphone picked it up. It sounded like a prayer. I didn't stop until I was standing right next to him. I was close enough to smell the fear sweating through his pores. I carefully, gently, lowered Leo to the ground. He stood on his good leg, leaning against my hip for support. I reached into my pocket. 2 security guards started to rush the stage from the pit. "Stop!" I commanded. My voice wasn't amplified, but it hit them like a physical blow. It was the voice of command. The voice of a man who held the detonator. I pulled the broken, melted remains of the ankle monitor from my pocket. I slammed it onto the podium. It landed with a heavy plastic crack right next to Gerald's champagne glass. "Tell them, Gerald," I said. Gerald stared at the device. He couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. "Tell them about the battery," I said, louder this time. "Tell them about the acid. Tell them how you decided that my son's leg was an acceptable loss for your profit margin." I turned to the audience. I scanned the faces in the front row. I saw the general from the Pentagon. I saw the investors from Wall Street. They were staring at the device on the podium. They were staring at the yellow chemical residue that was still bubbling slightly from the casing. "This is the Croft Guardian," I said, pointing at the wreckage. "It is not a shield. It is a cage, and it leaks." Gerald lunged for the microphone. He tried to salvage the unsalvageable. "He is lying. This man is mentally unstable. He kidnapped the boy. I didn't let him finish. I reached out and grabbed the microphone stand. I ripped it from his hand. I pointed to the screen behind us. Benny had played the final card. The screen changed one last time. It showed a document, a patent filing from 20 years ago, and at the bottom, the signature of the inventor. Henry Cole. "That is my name," I said to the room. "I wrote the code. I built the prototype. And I am telling you, this system is flawed. It was never meant to be used on humans." Gerald knew that, but he didn't care. I looked down at Gerald. He was shrinking. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. The titan of industry was melting away, leaving behind just a greedy, pathetic old man. "You wanted to buy him a new leg?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone caught, and carried to every corner of the room. I reached down and lifted Leo's pant leg. I unwrapped the towel. The audience saw the angry red welts. They saw the blisters where the heat and the chemical fumes had burned the skin of an 8-year-old boy. A woman in the front row screamed. Cameras started flashing. 1,000 shutters clicking at once, capturing the end of an empire. I looked Gerald dead in the eye. "You can't afford it, Gerald. There isn't enough money in the world to pay for this." Gerald looked out at the crowd. He saw the general standing up, buttoning his jacket, turning his back on the stage. He saw the investors on their phones, frantically shouting sell orders. He saw the illusion crumbling. He looked at me with pure hatred. "You ruined everything," he hissed. "No," I said, picking Leo up again. "I just turned the lights on." I turned my back on him. I walked away from the podium. I walked toward the stairs at the front of the stage. Security didn't stop me. They stepped aside. The crowd parted. They looked at me with awe. They looked at me like I was something dangerous and holy. I wasn't a waiter. I wasn't a watchmaker. I was a father. And as I walked down the aisle, the heavy oak doors at the back of the room burst open. But it wasn't more private security. It was the FBI. Blue windbreakers, badges, guns drawn. Benny had timed it perfectly. I stopped halfway down the aisle. I turned Leo's head so he wouldn't see his grandfather being thrown to the ground. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I looked up. It was an agent. He looked young, serious. "Mr. Cole?" he asked. I nodded. "We'll take it from here, sir." I looked back at the stage one last time. Gerald was in handcuffs. He was shouting, spitting, blaming everyone but himself. But no one was listening. The screen behind him had gone black. I looked down at Leo. "Let's go home, kiddo," I said. Leo buried his face in my shoulder. "Is the game over, Dad?" he asked. I stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the chaos behind me. "Yeah, Leo, we won." I did not leave the ballroom immediately. I couldn't. There is a specific kind of gravity that holds you in place when a mountain begins to crumble, and Gerald Croft was a mountain. I stood by the heavy oak doors, shielding Leo's eyes from the flashing strobe lights of the cameras, but I kept my own eyes wide open. I needed to witness this. I needed to etch this moment into my memory so that on the nights when the nightmares came back, I would have a weapon to fight them with. The FBI agents were moving through the crowd like blue sharks in a sea of tuxedos, but they weren't the ones inflicting the real damage. The real damage was happening on the 60-foot screen behind the stage. Benny was not done. He had one last slide in his chamber, one final piece of data that would hurt Gerald more than any prison sentence. In my earpiece, Benny's voice was buzzing with a dark, manic energy. "Watch this, Henry. Watch the money burn." The screen flickered. The image of the patent and the broken ankle monitor vanished. In its place, a live financial ticker appeared. It was the Bloomberg terminal feed for Croft Dynamics. The stock symbol, CRFT, was displayed in massive, bold letters. For a second, the line on the graph was flat, a plateau of high value where Gerald had lived comfortably for decades. Then, the market algorithms caught up with the reality of what had just happened. The algorithm heard the word leak. It heard the word acid. It heard the word fraud. The line didn't just dip. It fell off a cliff. It was a vertical drop of red ink that looked like a wound opening up on the screen. I watched the numbers tumble. $300 a share. 200. 150. It was freefall. Billions of dollars in market capitalization were vaporizing in seconds, dissolving into the digital ether. The sound in the ballroom changed. It wasn't the silence of shock anymore. It was the roar of panic. I saw the investors in the front row, the men who had been toasting Gerald 5 minutes ago, scrambling for their phones. They weren't looking at Gerald. They were looking at their portfolios bleeding out. I heard a man near me, a hedge fund manager with a face slick with sweat, screaming into his phone. "Sell it all. Dump it. I don't care about the spread. Just get me out. It is going to zero. Do you hear me? Zero." It was a beautiful cacophony, the sound of greed eating itself. On the stage, Gerald was watching the screen too. The handcuffs were already on his wrists, the metal biting into his skin. But he didn't seem to feel them. He was staring at the red line plummeting toward the bottom of the graph. His face was a mask of absolute horror. For a man like Gerald, losing his freedom was an inconvenience. He could buy lawyers. He could buy a comfortable cell. But losing his wealth? Losing his score? That was death. He started screaming at the screen, thrashing against the grip of the agents holding him. "Stop it! That is a glitch! Halt trading! Someone call the exchange! You can't do this to me! I am Croft Dynamics!" But the market didn't care. The market has no loyalty. It only has fear. And right now, the fear was contagious. The press, sensing the blood in the water, broke through the security line. They swarmed the stage, a pack of wolves descending on a wounded elk. The flashbulbs were blinding, a relentless lightning storm that exposed every wrinkle of panic on Gerald's face. They shoved microphones into his face, shouting questions that hit him like stones. "Mr. Croft, did you authorize the human testing? Is it true the device causes chemical burns? Are you facing bankruptcy? What do you have to say to your grandson?" Gerald tried to turn away, to hide his face from the lenses, but there was nowhere to go. He was trapped in the glare of his own failure. He looked small. He looked old. The carefully crafted image of the visionary genius had peeled away, leaving only a frightened criminal in a torn tuxedo. Then, Benny played the audio again. He looped it. "I can buy him a new leg. I can buy him a new leg. I can buy him a new leg." The sentence echoed through the hall, over and over, a mantra of cruelty that synced perfectly with the crashing stock price. Every time the words rang out, the stock dipped another 10 points. It was psychological warfare. It was Benny conducting a symphony of destruction. I felt a tug on my jacket. I looked down. Leo was watching me, his eyes wide. "Why is Grandpa screaming?" he asked. "Because he is losing the game, Leo," I said softly. "He bet everything on a lie, and the lie just broke." I looked back at the stage. Douglas was being led out from the wings by 2 other agents. He wasn't screaming. He was weeping. His head hung low, his tactical vest looking ridiculous now. He locked eyes with me for a brief second across the chaotic room. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded. It was a promise kept. The lead FBI agent, a woman with a sharp face and no-nonsense eyes, stepped up to Gerald. She didn't shout. She just leaned in close, but in the sudden lull between the screams of the reporters, her voice carried. "Gerald Croft, you are under arrest for securities fraud, conspiracy to commit assault, and child endangerment. You have the right to remain silent." "I suggest you use it, Gerald," I whispered to myself. But Gerald couldn't stay silent. As they began to drag him off the stage, hauling him toward the exit where I stood, he saw me. He saw the way the other guests were parting around me, giving me a wide berth of respect. He saw that I was still standing while he was falling. He stopped fighting the agents. He just stared at me with eyes that were black holes of hate. "You are nothing, Henry," he spat, spittle flying from his lips. "You are a broke watchmaker. You think this changes anything? I will be out on bail by morning. I will bury you in lawsuits until your grandchildren are paying my legal fees." I didn't step back. I stepped forward. I closed the distance until there was only a foot of air between us. The agents paused, sensing the weight of the moment. They let it happen. I leaned in close so only he could hear me over the din of the dying empire. "You don't get it, Gerald," I said. "I didn't do this to get rich. I didn't do this to win a lawsuit. I did this to show the world who you really are." I pointed to the screen where the stock price had just hit single digits. "You aren't a billionaire anymore, Gerald. You are just a bad investment." Gerald's face crumbled. The fight went out of him. He slumped in the agent's grip, a puppet whose strings had been cut. "Get him out of here," the agent ordered. They dragged him past me. He didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the floor, on the mud I had tracked in, on the reality that was rising up to swallow him. The press followed him out, a chaotic river of cameras and shouting, leaving the ballroom strangely empty. The guests who remained stood in shell-shocked clusters, whispering, holding their drinks like life rafts. They looked at me, then looked away, afraid that if they made eye contact, the truth might come for them next. I took a deep breath. The air in the room still smelled of expensive perfume, but underneath, there was the sharp, clean scent of ozone. The storm had passed. I looked at the big screen one last time. The ticker had stopped moving. Trading had been halted. Croft Dynamics was frozen in time, a monument to hubris. Benny's voice came through the earpiece, tired but satisfied. "It is done, Henry. The board is wiped clean." "Thank you, Benny," I said. "Hot dogs are on me for life," he replied. I disconnected the earpiece. I put the tablet in my pocket. I adjusted the towel on Leo's leg. "Ready to go?" I asked him. Leo nodded. "Can we get ice cream?" I laughed. It was a rusty sound, something I hadn't used in a long time. "Yeah, kiddo. We can get anything you want." I pushed open the heavy doors and walked out into the night. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing a moon that looked bright and clean. Behind me, the kingdom of Gerald Croft lay in ruins, destroyed not by an army, but by a father who simply refused to look away. The truth is a funny thing. It doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be seen. And tonight, the whole world had seen it. The breakdown of a dynasty does not happen in silence. It happens with the sound of steel clicking against steel. The ballroom was no longer a place of celebration. It was a containment zone. The FBI agents moved through the confused crowd of socialites and investors with the efficiency of a machine that had been waiting a long time to be switched on. They didn't scream. They didn't run. They simply advanced, a blue tide washing away the golden sandcastle Gerald Croft had built. I stood near the exit, Leo's hand gripping mine. I didn't want to leave just yet. I needed to see it. I needed to see the invincibility stripped away from them, layer by layer, until there was nothing left but two frightened men facing the consequences of their own arrogance. Douglas was the first to fall. I watched as two agents cornered him near the dessert table. The man who had worn a tactical vest and held a gun to my chest less than an hour ago was now trying to blend into the crowd. He had shed the vest, throwing it under a table, trying to look like just another guest. But the agents had his face. They had his description. And thanks to the data dump I had sent them, they had the logs of him ordering the illegal chemical components for the ankle monitors. He didn't fight. When the agent placed a hand on his shoulder, Douglas collapsed. He didn't drop to his knees and surrender. He crumbled like a building with a rotten foundation. I watched him weeping, his face red and blotchy, pointing a shaking finger toward the stage, toward his father. "He made me do it," Douglas sobbed, loud enough for the press to hear. "He told me it was safe. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." It was pathetic. The tough soldier, the heir apparent, throwing his own father to the wolves to save his own skin. The agents didn't care. They spun him around, pulled his arms behind his back, and I heard the distinct, heavy click of the handcuffs. It was the sweetest sound I had heard in 20 years. They marched him out, his expensive Italian loafers dragging on the carpet. A man who had never been told no in his life finally hearing the ultimate rejection. Then they came for Gerald. Gerald was not crying. He was bargaining. He was standing in the center of a circle of agents, his face a mask of purple rage. He wasn't speaking to the agents. He was shouting over their heads, trying to make eye contact with anyone who could help him. He was looking for the judges he had bribed. He was looking for the senators he had funded. But no one looked back. The guests were busy studying the floor, or their phones, distancing themselves from the toxic fallout. "This is a misunderstanding," Gerald roared, slapping an agent's hand away. "Do you know who I am? I am a defense contractor. I have clearance. You cannot touch me. Call the director. Get him on the phone right now." The lead agent, a man with gray hair and eyes that looked like they had seen every lie in the book, didn't blink. He simply grabbed Gerald's wrist. He didn't use excessive force. He used just enough. He twisted Gerald's arm behind his back with a practiced motion that forced the billionaire to bend forward at the waist, the posture of a servant. "Gerald Croft," the agent said, his voice calm and bored. "You are under arrest for federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit torture, and gross negligence resulting in bodily harm to a minor." "Torture!" Gerald screamed. "It was a safety device. I was protecting him." The second cuff clicked into place. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of the room. The cameras flashed in a blinding wave, capturing the image that would be on the front page of every newspaper in the world tomorrow morning. The great Gerald Croft, hunched over, shackled, defeated. They began to walk him toward the doors, toward me. I could have stepped aside. I could have let them pass, but I didn't. I stood directly in his path, blocking the exit. The agents slowed down. They saw me. They saw the boy with the bandaged leg standing next to me. They recognized the dynamic. They paused, giving me 5 seconds. Gerald looked up. His hair was messy. His tie was crooked. He looked at me, and for a second I thought he would spit at me. But he didn't. He looked at me with confusion. He genuinely didn't understand how this had happened. How a watchmaker had taken down a king. "You," Gerald whispered, his voice raspy. "You have no money. You have no power. How?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had made my daughter's life miserable, who had tried to turn my son into a lab rat. I felt the weight of the last 20 years lift off my shoulders. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt pity. I leaned in close so only he could hear me. "You spent 40 years building a fortress, Gerald. You bought the bricks with stolen code and other people's pain. You thought you were safe because you were at the top of the tower." I paused, glancing down at the handcuffs on his wrists. "But you forgot one thing about watchmakers, Gerald. We don't look at the outside of the machine. We look at the gears inside. And when we see a broken gear, we don't paint over it. We remove it." Gerald stared at me, his mouth opening to speak, but no words came out. "And by the way," I added, my voice dropping to a whisper, "I checked the time for you. It is midnight. The party is over." I stepped aside. "Get him out of here," I said to the agent. The agents pushed Gerald forward. He stumbled, almost tripping over his own feet. He didn't look back. He kept his head down, staring at the mud on the floor, the mud I had tracked in, the mud that was now the only thing he had left. I watched them drag him through the double doors and out into the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers waiting in the driveway. The siren wailed, a long, mournful sound that signaled the end of an era. The ballroom was empty of threats now. The monster was in a cage. The dragon was slain. I looked down at Leo. He was squeezing my hand so hard his fingers were white. "Is he coming back, Dad?" Leo asked, his voice small. "No, son," I said, looking at the empty doorway. "He is going to a place where money doesn't matter." I picked Leo up. He was getting too big to carry, but tonight, I would have carried him across the ocean if I had to. I walked out of the ballroom, past the shocked guests, past the ruin of the buffet, past the wreckage of a life we were leaving behind. We walked out into the cool night air, The rain had stopped completely. The clouds had parted, and the stars were out, sharp and bright above the city skyline. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with clean air. I didn't have a plan for tomorrow. I didn't have a job. I didn't have a fortune. But as I walked toward the gate, leaving the Croft estate behind me for the last time, I felt richer than Gerald had ever been. I had my son. I had my honor. And for the first time in a long time, I had peace. What did I learn from the night the lights went out at Croft Manor? I learned that you can build a fortress out of gold, but if the foundation is rotten, it only takes one honest man to bring it down. Gerald thought power came from fear. He thought leverage was something you bought on the stock market. But real power is the hand that holds your child when the world is burning. Real leverage is the truth. We often think we are too small, too old, or too poor to fight back against the giants. But remember this, even the biggest machine depends on the smallest gear. If you are that gear, and you refuse to turn for a tyrant, the whole machine stops. Never let anyone tell you that your dignity has a price tag. If this story resonated with you, if you believe that justice is worth fighting for, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments below, have you ever had to stand up to someone who thought they owned you? I will be reading your stories. Until next time, keep your eyes open and keep your gears turning.